Hello and welcome to episode 66 of the Foundry Roundtable, where for no apparent reason we all go crazy and start killing Jedi, instead of being the podcast exclusively covering the Foundry for Star Trek Online. I'm your tame Foundry author, Drogan1701. With me is a man who also got defeated 7-1 this week, but this was in backgammon instead of soccer, Hippiejohn.
That's because I don't really play backgammon very well. Now, if it were chess or maybe Mancala, I could have done a lot better. Especially if it were Mancala.
I haven't played that in years. Great game. And we have a man who is certainly not a co-conspirator in the Justin Bieber egging case. Or at least that's his story. Markhawkman.
Who? What?
To be able to claim such ignorance.
Plausible deniability, right? And speaking of Beaker, a man who may or may not be up for an Emmy this year for his outstanding work as extra number 324, Greendragoon.
So wait, are we killing Jedi or are we working as extras? Because I'm confused.
Yes. And we have with us one of our regular guests, one of the founding fathers of the Foundry faithful, Castmodean.
I'm debating whether I wanted to go with Please State the Nature of the Foundry Emergency, or I'm going to sing the Doom song now.
Can't you do both?
Oh,
You kind of just have done both.
Well, I mean, we have so much Foundry news this week that I think your inevitable reaction would be Doom? Question mark. So, first things first, the Foundry has actually been down for 2 days now. Cryptic Frost's explanation was, we had to shut down editing, I'm quoting now, we had to shut down editing last night as there was nasty reoccurring crash affecting the Foundry's data management system. Working on getting that fixed so we can get Foundry editing back up and running. That was Tuesday?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was Tuesday. Which Castmodean thinks is my fault because that's the exact day I got my internet back, so of course something else must have to break.
Always an exchange there must be.
It was also the same time I did something else.
Yeah, we can keep that a secret for now, though. But Frost posted earlier today that the ETA, which for those of you who don't know, and I'm willing to bet there's some MMO forum posters who don't actually know what this means, ETA is estimated time of arrival. So, what he posted was, if all goes well, the Foundry will be back up Thursday.
Yay!
So, if all goes well, and occasionally we know it doesn't all go well.
And there was much rejoicing.
Yay.
Exactly. However, the Foundry is up now on Tribble, and there are new additions to play with. So first and foremost is the Basic Oddysey and Botrasqu uniforms have been added to the costume creator. In talking with Thomas the Cat on Tribble, it seems that there is a system in place where the Foundry costume creator automatically gets access to anything that a new player character can wear. So if they add new stuff to the default uniform selection, it shows up in the Foundry.
Yeah,
so,
and we've kind of seen some of this in the past.
Sure.
With like the default Romulan options.
Yeah, do we have those yet?
Mm-hmm.
We have everything you get when you're like a colonist on Viranet.
When you start a brand new character. Anything else, anything bought or earned later in the game has to be added manually. So that's the reason for that, is that, either, essentially no one's been assigned that or no one has done it in their spare time. Which he pretty much confirmed. So, before we go into other updates, I have a two-part question for each one of you. Will you be updating your NPCs in the published missions with those uniforms? And, second part of the question, will you be using Thomas the Cat's color guide? So, Hippie, let's start with you.
No to the first question, because the published missions that I have do not use Starfleet officers in any way, so I don't have to. And they don't use any Klingon officers in any way that are not original series Klingons or original series Starfleet officers. So I will keep those costumes as they are. However, using Thomas the Cat's color guide on my own on one of my own tunes, I really like it. It grew on me. I didn't think I did when I just looked at pictures of it, but when I put it on the tune and I did the whole crew the way that, yeah, it looks good. I like it. I'll be using it for any missions that do use 2410 and beyond, yeah.
Right, Mark, what about you? You going to go back and edit your old missions?
Well, like Hippie, there are a lot of missions that I have done where I just don't use any, fed characters that I had a reason to customize like that. Although, there is a strong possibility that I might tinker with the Romulan stuff because I do have a mission that has Romulans in it that I had to, shall we say, fake using fed costume options.
Try using the medical jacket and changing the colors. It's not
That's a nice
perfect,
jacket.
certainly, but
I actually used one of the off-duty robe options to simulate something similar to the TOS Romulan look.
cool.
Greendragoon, will you be editing your mission?
Well, I've been kind of agonizing about this because I submitted it only a week ago, and now I'm already considering pulling it to wait for the update to come up so I can update the missions. I wouldn't worry about it.
Well, of course, at this point, we don't know actually exactly when this is going to drop, just sometime this month.
Yeah, I was going to say, didn't they say the end of the month, like the 31st?
Well, they just said the end of the month. They didn't specify a
Oh.
date. I'm hoping that it'll be more like the 25th.
Well,
Yeah.
pre-patching has started.
So you got to figure they're not too far away.
Which usually starts within the week.
For those of us who are going to be at Vegas, would rather have it earlier, frankly.
Yeah, but I mean, I wouldn't worry about it too much just for Part 1's sake, but there are characters in Part 1 that show up again in Part 2, and I would really like to update all the uniforms for Part 2 because you spend extensive amounts of time in your crew or ship interior. So I'm thinking I might pull it from submittal, just so I can keep the two parts consistent.
Can always resubmit it later.
True. But I keep
Like
coming up with
Castmodean.
excuses to pull it.
Castmodean, what about you?
Well, I have a slightly different problem in that I have two missions that I'm not allowed to touch because they're both spotlit. So I totally do want to do it because the big thing is that on the spotlights I don't really care about because they're fairly static and they don't need it. But the missions that I haven't published, plus the one that is published, that do use lots of Fed, I spend a lot in costumes, putting people into the Sierra 1 costume, because of the old choices, that was the one I preferred the most. So now I have the Odyssey, which I can just suddenly start using stock NPC characters and get back all these costumes and make other things.
That's cool.
Because, yeah,
You could save on some budget there.
I'm at my costume limit already.
What our
on all
costume
of
limit is 50? Am I?
Yes.
Okay.
Correct.
But it's really easy to do that when you have to make 30 Fed characters so that you don't have clones running around.
Mm-hmm. That's an interesting question because I've noticed that you do it, and I've noticed a couple of other authors that do it. That you take the time to do that so that you don't have clones running around, and I really appreciate. It's how much of your costume budget does that eat up? Like you just said, 30 characters. That's
30 Fed characters that are wearing Starfleet uniforms. That's not counting the aliens and other things that will be roaming around that aren't wearing a Starfleet uniform.
And you don't just want to fall back on the standard stock NPCs?
I absolutely do not care for any of the well, I take that back. I think Antares 3 works well as like a security uniform, if I'm remembering the right one.
But it's all standardized now.
What he means is the stock NPCs that are available in the NPC context window.
Right.
I think a lot of them are going to be, if not all of them at this point, are going to be wearing the
Odyssey uniforms.
Yeah, they've all been
Odyssey
updated with the Odyssey uniform.
Yep.
Yeah,
I
so
think,
in that case, I can get back so many costumes.
Yeah, I mean, because in my case, any of the things that I have that use one of those stock NPC contacts that's wearing a Federation uniform, I don't have a reason to use one specific Federation uniform over another. So,
Well,
I guess recently I've been just playing some cryptic content, some of the stuff that they haven't touched yet, like the Cardassian stories and some of the Romulan stuff, and they do the, you can walk around a deck on one of their ships and it's just clone after clone after clone, and honestly you notice it when it's happening, and it's one of those little touches that you almost don't notice because it just seems right. I'm just pointing out that that's a really great touch, and I like the authors who do that.
Well, it was actually part of the feedback when my Purity mission was in testing. It was one of the feedback from one of you guys, and it may have even been you, Hippie, that said something about, in the final ground battle there were, a bunch of guys who looked like each other.
It was me and
Maybe
Baz.
you wanted some more variety there, so that was something
Baz
that
and I
there.
both noticed it. I think the way that I just put it is the way that it occurs to me, is that when you see a bunch of clones, you notice that there are a bunch of clones, but when everybody looks unique, it's not something that stands out and you go, oh wow, look, everyone was unique, because that just seems like the way it should be.
I know in part 2 I've got 3 different factions, I guess you could call them. So I have like 3 sets of 6 NPCs, and then for each faction I'll just mix match between them.
Yeah, what I usually do is I start with one that's got the uniform that I like on it, and then I start duplicating it and changing around the head and the height and things like that.
Yeah, just as long as you don't change the race, and then you have to start all over again.
I actually have seen some interesting things that come from tinkering with settings on one race and changing it to a different race, and just the weirdness that it occasionally gives you.
But sometimes it'll keep some of the features, which is kind of nice.
Like if you've extended the nose or something like that, it might keep that, but yeah.
So I will definitely be going back and redoing, because I love the Odyssey uniform and I think it's great, and I also am one of those people that I like to use a lot of like the friendly Federation mobs to fill out a map to make it seem like there's more people there. So, and I want them to match that. So I'm definitely going to be doing that. But I'm like Cast here. I've got a Federation spotlight that I can't edit. So if at some point I can edit that, I will definitely be changing that one as well. So let's see. From the chat room, I think Captain PF Dennis said because he's got 22 missions, he will not be going back and changing all of those. I can't blame him for that. That's for sure. Let's see. Pax Federatica brought up a good point. He says that he's leaving all his current missions as they are because uniform-wise, because they all take place in 2409, which is true because this is supposed to be a 2410 uniform.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, there's the thought. If you want your missions to be set in 2409, you can go ahead and use 2409 uniforms.
That said, I mean, any new player playing through 2409 will see the Odyssey uniforms. Because it was a retroactive change.
It kind of becomes the only place that piece of uniform history will be recorded will be on things like the wiki and Foundry people who decide to make mention of it.
Well, and people who've seen that blog that has some of the uniform progression, that picture.
And you know what? It's in the storyline too. The fall of Earth's space dock and the rebuilding and all that.
Sure.
So I mean, something I kind of fall back on is that I figure ship captains are still allowed to determine their uniform scheme.
think they said so in the blog.
Yeah. And so usually what I'll do is if I'm trying to go for generic Starfleet, I'll use the Odyssey uniforms. If I'm trying to establish that said officers are from a specific ship, then I might design a different uniform specifically for them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, me when I'm designing uniforms, it's usually because the characters aren't Federation personnel, and there isn't something in the preset database that matches what I want. I mean, like, I mentioned it before, but one of my missions, I have Bosliks in the mission. There is absolutely nothing in the preset database that even vaguely looks like a Boslik.
I just thought of something, by the way, that makes those, even if those preset NPCs that we all have are all in Odyssey uniforms now, those preset NPCs are also the faces and the tunes that get pulled and used on Federation mobs.
Yeah.
So if you use those, they'll be
True.
clones of any mobs that you place as well. Just a
Yeah,
thought.
I definitely would never use those for hero characters.
Right.
But yeah, if you're just going for generic background people that you're not trying to draw attention to, then they're great.
Yeah, see, the thing is, though, is that I pretty much always go through each of the NPC groups, and I physically change the costume to stop that. So, by yes, if you just leave it as default, yes, that will happen.
Right, but if
you're niggly and go in there and change each and every one of them, that's entirely different.
Right.
Well, let's move on because we got some other additions to the Foundry. We got some new Federation ships. Let's see. The list here is the Armitage, Thunderchild, Venture, Regent, Gladius, Sao Paulo, Exeter, Tempest, Rhode Island, Bellerophon, Aventine, Raidmaker, and Vesta and Avenger. Now, the Avenger was in there before, but I think it's now just labeled correctly. The Vesta and its sister ships were in there before, but they were not working correctly. They were just black with lights. But now they're working correctly. I have looked at those. The majority of the other ones are like this, the new and different skins for the...
Yeah, they're all the
for some of
24 and 9
existing ships.
variants.
Yeah, which is nice because we were definitely lacking in those.
Have you guys checked the Obelisk one recently? Because I tried that one a while back, and it wasn't displaying when I tried it.
No, it's still not.
Yeah, there's still a few
Still
that just not sure how they got in, but whatever, they didn't come in correctly.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and the Risian Cruisliner slipped into Holodeck without any fanfare. So it's available. It's available now.
Well, at least
or
one
it will
author
be
that'll
when the
be happy
Foundry
about
comes
that.
back up. Yeah, he found it
with
before.
all
He
of
found it
its
before I did.
insane customization options.
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
And yeah, Primar's reminding me of something. Is we actually have some of the mirror skins on some of these ships.
Nice.
Specifically, the Rhode Island has it. I know that was the one I looked at. Or no, Tempest. It does. Is the one I looked at.
Huh, that's kind of odd because I don't know that there's a mirror version of that ship.
I think there is.
Maybe it's a spoiler.
Of that type of escort, I think there is.
Next lockbox. Although they're right, there is a mirror patrol escort now.
Yeah, and that's
So-
just a skin for the patrol escort,
Yeah.
essentially.
Okay, that makes sense now.
Yeah. Let's see. We also have the original series dress and medical uniforms have been added to the ground costume creator. However,
But they
I think there's
only work on men.
yeah, that's where I was going next with that. It's a bit of a bug there. And then the other note was display names have been updated for the Akira family of ships, and the Interact 4 Star Cluster sector doors can now be used for Foundry missions. However, there also seems to be a problem with this, is that the KDF is very limited on what star clusters it can use. I think only like the ones in Omega Leonis and the nearby sectors.
I don't know,
hope
this
they
is,
open up more.
I am disappointed with that.
Yeah, I
Right.
just
But
really hope they...
I know the feedback
KDF
has
needs
gotten
a
to
lot more.
QA, at least. So they've been
Yeah,
told, hey, we
Cryptic
really
Frost
need
is
to...
aware.
I mean, and The reason I
It may
hope
not
that
be an
changes
intentional
is there
thing.
are KDF that can get to Federation clusters, and Federation can get
Oh, all you got to do
KDF
now is
space, you know.
complete surface tensions.
Yeah.
Come on. Why deny KDF doors in Cardassian space? That doesn't make sense to me at all.
No,
It's
it
something I
Yeah,
noticed a long time
and KDF
ago.
players should be able to get to every sector except Sirius without needing anything special.
I don't think there was like a grand scheme behind it. I think it was just whoever was assigned to add the doors was kind of thinking in the same context that whoever was added the original Klingon doors did. That, oh, this is Klingon space, add doors there.
Yeah, by the way, the original Klingon doors, that assortment sucks too, so, you know.
Yeah, so
I think it might actually key more off of the diplomacy / marauding stuff than anything. Because if you think about it, the doors that they have access to are the doors that they have access to at base level diplomacy. Whereas
that changed when they opened up Cardassian space, and technically they can get anywhere except Sirius.
Yeah.
And even now, all you have to do is complete surface tensions, and now completing surface tensions counts as diplomatic access.
Yeah.
well, that's assuming that the Foundry uses, more up to date checks.
It probably doesn't know, you're right.
Unfortunately, we can only speculate as to the reason for this.
Until somebody comes and says I'm wrong.
Well, yeah, I mean, feedback is submitted, that's what we can do.
Sure. Let's see. Other news. We had this week a conversation with Taco on the forums, and he suggested that it might be helpful if we created a list of top map requests, similar to the one that we did for assets. So what I've been doing is I've got a forum thread going. I've been asking for people to submit their top map requests, collecting these responses and putting them in a list, and I will put out a poll next week so we can get these top results to Taco. Got a really, really great cross-section of maps. Interestingly enough, one that no one has requested, but I would kind of like to see, so I may put it on the list for myself, is the one that we're sitting in right now, which is the Captain's Table.
Yeah.
It'd be cool, yeah.
It may not be my, number one personal request.
It's
a cool map.
Why I didn't. There's probably 20 requests for maps I could have come up with. You asked us to stick to 3, so I did.
Yeah, well, I asked to stick to 3, and maybe about 3 people actually paid attention to that, so I took that part out.
Captain's Table is one of those things where, while I would love to have it in the Foundry, it's one of those things. It's just there's a long list of other things I'd rather have.
Yeah, I didn't.
I think we've all got that. Yeah.
I didn't explain my choices like a lot of people did on the forum. My choices were a player ship interior. I don't care what size, of every faction. And the reason for that is because currently we cannot really write bottle shows without really going out of our way to create something that doesn't exactly look like a player ship's real interior.
Yeah,
So and I would love
and all the player ship interiors are on there. I've actually got, let's see, we're up to 67 maps on there.
Wow.
So I actually asked for the USS DeWitt interior because it was like a more expansive version of the player ship interior.
Mm-hmm.
Also
I like the people asking the Origin interior. I don't know what I'll vote for.
The Origin interior is tough because I don't think it's very big.
Yeah, it's only got like one hallway in the bridge.
And a transporter room, and I think maybe engineering?
No, it's not even that. It's like a computer room or something.
Origin's really just the bridge.
What we need them is to build something bigger with it and then put that in. with that style, or give us the walls.
That would probably be more helpful.
And Primar, of course, who was my inspiration for doing this list in this way with his, because he did the asset list, says that's nothing. The asset list was over 120 to start with.
And that was a lot of groups of things, as I remember, like
Yeah.
all
It was,
transporters or.
I figured maps I had better list everything individually because they got to do it one at a time.
Yeah.
Yep.
Also, in the vein of listing things individually, if there's an exploration cluster map that you think would be something useful to have in Foundry, document it now before you can't see it ever again.
Well, and that's tough because as we talked to Taco about, The map name that you see when you're in the mission doesn't correspond to what they can look up on the other side.
Yeah, and he kind of verified on the thread, too, that it's kind of like looking for a needle in a haystack.
Well,
Which sucks, because as you've been saying, Mark, there's some interesting maps there, and there's some sort of like terrain types, like coral or something, that we don't have.
Yeah, I mean, Rohorologa is one that I mentioned several times simply because it's a coral island, and we have absolutely nothing that looks like that in the Foundry. I mean, there is a map in the Foundry that has a similar layout, but it has a different theme.
Mm-hmm. It's not everything about the Genesis engine was bad.
No.
It just had a hard time placing interactables on sometimes pretty decent maps that it created.
Well, we don't know that the Genesis engine actually created the maps. It may have been like an artist saying, hey, create 50 maps, and the Genesis engine will fill it out.
Based on what I've seen from my extensive playing of those missions over the years, I think that there was an extensive use of randomization creating the maps. I mean, I do think that the artists, intentionally placed certain aspects of things when they were initializing the randomization routine, but I think things like the actual slope of the terrain was randomly generated.
So do I. That's why things ended up
and
beneath
Tumor Boy is essentially confirming this in our chat room now. Says the Genesis engine made the maps.
Okay.
Yeah. Hey, we have Tumor Boy in our chat room.
Hours.
But in any case, I will see if I can find a way to. He says we, the artists, would create palettes that the Genesis would then lay out however it saw fit. Which is an interesting way to do it. And then we'd have to go back and fix up the stupid bits.
Well, I mean, given how fast development was back then, I can understand their desire to use any trick up their sleeves they can get.
Sure.
Well,
it certainly created a lot of maps to use.
I mean, but because of the fact that, it's a random number generator. What's the point of using a random number generator if you're going to do all the work yourself?
Yeah.
True.
Yeah. Well, I will see if there's maybe some logical way we can add some exploration maps to that list. But in the meantime, we also have a character costume poll that I've done. Because I actually asked Taco if we did one, would he pass it along to the character art team? So I put together one. I tried to figure out all of the missing costumes and put it out there for people to vote on. There were a few that I missed that I have since added. We have more than 70 responses as of today.
Nice.
The current leader is the Romulan Republic uniforms. Also high up are EVA suits, Starfleet Academy, and the new variants to the Odyssey uniform, which are not with the basic ones that we have in the Foundry on Tribble. Obviously, the disclaimer is always that there's no guarantee that anything will come of this, but the lists do seem to be gaining traction. Maybe this is a better way of going about focusing the community's requests.
Yeah.
Better way than a player council.
I was going to mention, the thing that I've liked about both of those threads is it looks like a pretty broad spectrum of authors. People that I know personally and people that I've never even spoken to and, everywhere in between have responded on those threads. And I like that. It seems to be reaching a really broad spectrum of people.
Yeah, and while it does kind of seem like it's favoring Federation a little bit in
the game does.
In some areas.
I'm putting the link
other
to
than all the Romulan stuff.
Yeah, and I will include links to both threads in the show notes.
Actually, I think we even had one person show up because they were confused as to which forum they were posting in.
Oh, that happens all the time.
Yeah, they wanted a swimsuit that they saw on an NPC for players, but they said, "Oh wait, this is the Foundry." Well, okay, we could put it in the Foundry too.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know why they didn't add it for players. Whether there was a good reason for it or not.
Who knows?
It's one of the original swimsuit designs from Old Risa.
I have a guess, Dragoon.
Okay,
There's a good reason, and my guess is next year there's going to be another summer event, and they'll be like, look, that swimsuit that you saw last year, you can buy it this year.
Kind of
Maybe.
like how we've never had color customization of any kind on the winter outfits.
I just wonder if it
that way
wasn't.
they can
Could be a thing
adding
they
new
can-
colors. Yeah,
I just wonder if it wasn't properly
it's
rigged
great.
for player characters or something like that.
Also
No,
possible.
I really think it's because that way they have something that they can keep adding, and they let you see it sometimes. Like, the winter colors are always kind of a surprise. At least the last couple of years, it's like, what colors are the jackets going to be? And this year, it was, what color are the jetpacks going to be on Risa? That thing. You know what I mean?
Oh, we got hoverboards now too.
Yeah, and so it makes you want to go back and get more of the tokens to buy those things.
Yeah, what premium one is it going to be next year?
Right.
That's actually not a bad idea. Intentionally adding in like exclusive designs a year early, but not letting the
Yes.
players have it until the following year, so that they're like all excited to get it.
So when they get it, they're like, yes!
Here's model.
Although in the case of this one particular swimsuit design, I think the devs just forgot about it. Just my guess,
Whatever.
but
Whatever,
I mean,
you know.
because also there's the fact that the Risian NPCs with the swimsuits often have accessories that players can't.
Yeah.
And you know, sometimes they design NPCs with no thought towards having that as playable stuff.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, because there's one thing that someone pointed out in one of the random Fed mobs that you'll occasionally see in the game is it'll be this alien character that has a mixture of racial traits that's impossible for a Fed character to actually have, or any playable character for that matter.
Well, that comes from when something was broken in the game. They made that character in the tailor, and as long as they don't change the outfit, they get to keep the outfit.
No, I'm not
Yeah,
talking
like
about actual things that I've seen on a player character. I'm talking about random NPCs that can't.
Okay.
Yeah, well, I mean, the devs
Yeah.
don't have the same restrictions that we do on
Not even a little bit.
characters. Yeah, but I mean, our character creator is tries to prevent us from creating combinations that would hypothetically like clip with each other or not interact well.
Mhm.
Well,
Where the
also
devs can make judgment calls and not deal with that restriction.
certain parts seem to be locked simply because they're associated with a specific race, and the devs decided that other races are not allowed to use them, such as
Could be.
patient skill. You can't use them on aliens. Certain of the Saurian features, I think, are... No, wait, Saurians are a bad example. I think you can replicate the look of a Saurian with an alien.
Yeah, because you
But,
get the skin
you
and
know.
everything.
Trill are an example, because while aliens can use one of the Trill spot options, they only get to use one of them, and that particular spot option, on aliens at least, only goes down to the neck.
Well, yeah, and that has a lot to do with them trying to make certain races have their own unique appeal.
Mm-hmm. Although in the case of Trills, since the regular Trills are actually not a C-store unlock, it's only the joined Trills that are a C-store unlock that, you know.
Yeah, but I mean, not even just that, but I'm just talking about, or kind of give a downside for people like choosing Alien just so they can like do all of these special customizations, yet still make it look like a Trill.
Mhm.
I have on
So-
several occasions seen people playing Endorians that were actually aliens.
Let's see. Have we covered all the news? Dragoon, do you have anything else in your
I think
notes?
so. I don't have anything else.
Okay. Well, let's move on to what we've been working on. And I will say right off the bat that I've been moving and haven't had internet, so I haven't been working on anything. So, Hippiejohn, I think you have.
Yeah, a little bit. Before my kitty got sick, I was starting. It also has to do with my discussion topic. Is that, you know, with the thing that we talked about last week, that Rogue Enterprise kind of jump started with, you know, the idea of doing a user-generated exploration sector, as well as, pretty soon after that idea was brought up, they announced the idea that the exploration sectors are gone, and you're going to have Foundry doors where they all used to be. And before the dev blog even came out, I sat down and thought, wow, that's actually kind of cool in its own way. And then the dev blog made me mad, so that's a topic for later. But we can write exploration missions if we want to that link into those places. And people who are calling for, I want something, that's going to surprise me. Well, I'm going to write, anytime I write an exploration mission like that, I'm going to write it with the beginning being something along the lines of, this is a likely first contact mission, and that's it. Or this is a likely planetary exploration, and then begin an exploration mission set at one of those doors. And so this week, because of that, I found myself needing to start learning how to create a city, and I hate it. It's the worst thing ever. But at least in one part of it, I'm doing something that I'm not having a problem with. And that has been the time that I have spent in the editor. That's been what I did. One part of this, I'm going to have the player going into a city, not being able to be seen doing what they're doing, and going into a sewer to go underneath the entire city and come up somewhere else. So what I'm doing with that map is I'm using the walls on a map that has very shallow water, using the walls to create the maze of the sewers first, so that then I'm going to put the platform on top of it and build from there, so that the maze of the sewers that you go into will all, will exist. And I've been having a lot of fun doing that. I love mazes. It's just one of my favorite things. So, and I've never encountered one in a Foundry mission. So that's what I was
think
doing this
usually
week.
with custom
There's a
creation.
few.
Yeah,
There's a
there's
few
a
around.
KDF mission named Labyrinth or something like that.
Cool.
Of course, Labyrinth is something of a non-traditional maze in that the person who created it used triggers so that the walls will move around as you're walking around.
I'm going to do that too.
One thing you got to be careful of is that mazes can be very object consuming. So trying to create a city and a maze may prove a little tricky.
The nice,
Do that
the
on
nice
different
thing
maps.
the nice thing is that I don't need to create the city in that case very much. I need to create one side of the city outside of the wall. And then everything inside of the wall is just set decoration. It's not actually a whole lot of objects, because it's not building the whole city, because then they're going underneath all of that empty space to come up on the other side, so I don't need to build the entire city on that one, which is really nice.
Yeah.
So-
I mean, as long as you don't have to deal with any Vista shots, you should be fine.
Yep. So, anyway, that's what I've been working on this week.
Well, Hippie, I've been actually thinking along those lines a little bit myself, in that I almost think that, maybe as many of us as possible should drop what we're doing and make some small exploration missions that we can hook up to those doors and have them ready on day one, so that there's something at those doors.
I could do something much smaller than the idea I have in mind. That's certainly possible. The idea
I think all of us could do a Foundry mission in 3 weeks, even if that's not our default setting.
Actually, I have 2 missions already where it would actually make sense from both a story perspective and for where the mission's located to actually change the mission starting point to one of those doors. Because, I used a random solar system that was on the edge of the area that I really wanted to use instead of what I really wanted to use, which was the edge of the map.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's an opportunity to look at some of your existing missions and see if they might be applicable.
Yeah, I know there's quite a few Foundry missions out there that take place in kind of like edge of space kind of locales. That would be ideal for sticking into the exploration areas.
Yeah, I
Oh,
mean,
I agree.
in my case, we have Darkness Between the Stars, where you go to a nebula, literally in unexplored space, which, in my thinking, it was, off to the side of whatever that sector block is that's north of Alpha Centauri. And it's like outside the actual map area.
Yeah, now you can set it at the exploration cluster in that sector block.
Yep.
Yeah.
Sounds good. All right, Green Dragoon, I know you've gotten some work done for sure.
So yes, actually went camping this last weekend, and the entire time I had my iPad with me, and I was like typing out dialogue as I was camping. And so I got all the dialogue written. I got home on Monday. I quick rushed back and started finishing up maps and putting things together. And things were mostly built already. I just had to place some stuff. And so I more or less finished up maps 10 and 11 that evening. And so as of Monday night, I believe, I actually did the first full test publish of In the Shadow of Midas Part 2. And it is now possible to play from beginning to end, although it's incredibly unpolished at the moment.
And you can't fix it.
And I can't fix it at the moment, but that's okay, because now is the good time to really start getting some feedback on it.
Yeah, no doubt, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
One star
published
broke the
playtests.
Foundry.
Yeah. That, of course, is Castmodean's other theory, is that Dragoon...
He overloaded the
mere
primary
hints.
core by leaking delta radiation from that blasted array. It should have been torn down years ago.
Or the Fates have
almost as-
decided that Part 2 was never meant to actually be.
It's almost as much of a menace as what's the one over by Cardassian space?
Actually, Midas
The
Ray is kind of by
Argus
Cardassian.
Argus. There we go.
Yeah.
How
So
do you
the
like
one
that?
the one that Duke of Rock had all those. Well, still,
I
that's a
keep getting
a
the
good place
Midas
to be.
array confused with the Argus array.
Come on,
Yeah,
Midas
Midas
Ray
talked
had-
to Voyager. Argus just spied on the spoonheads.
Hang on,
Yeah.
do you guys realize that both arrays have a connection to Reginald Barclay?
Yes,
Yes.
they do.
Coincidence?
One of them turned him into a.
Or conspiracy.
I'm going with conspiracy.
Yeah.
Conspiracy
All right.
works. Dragoon used it to crash the.
Midas array.
Yeah, I gotta wonder sometimes. The timing was a little bit coincidental.
Suspicious. We don't believe
Although-
in coincidences here.
Although, I mean, I wasn't noticing any problems editing it, or publishing it, or test playing it, so I guess the crash
Well,
happened
it
after.
also happened right about the same time they opened up pre-patching, right?
Yeah, I think it was too close for it to not have something to do with each other.
No
The
doubt.
pre-
Yeah,
patching.
but I think at this point we're kind of all, this is all well into the realm of speculation.
Yep.
I mean, it could easily have been that it was
speculation or like tinfoil hat sort of area.
something us Foundry authors do great.
Yeah.
You know,
I got-
we really need the ability to add hats to characters.
How many
That comes out of nowhere. Wow. I think I
how
agree
many
with you
hats do we
he's
actually
right.
have in the game?
Yeah.
I
we don't have
agree
a lot
with
of
you
hats.
Completely.
Anyway, Mark, have you been working on anything lately?
I tinkered with a few missions over the last week. Mostly the tinkering I did in Foundry was looking to see what themes were available for the non-episode maps in the Foundry to verify which of the exploration cluster maps would be most useful.
Cool. I think you've got you took some demo records of that, right? That I'm going to
Yeah.
record for next week.
Yeah, because most of the
Excellent.
maps that I did the demo records of, either we have things with a similar theme or we have things that are nearly identical. Although in many cases, the Foundry version of the map does not have a horizon, which is something that has started to annoy the living crud out of me. Oh well.
All right, Castmodean, have you been working on anything in the Foundry lately?
Well, I've still been playing around with the follow-up to Digging in the Past, trying to fix its maps from its before-time brokenness, and finding out that, oh, if I do this, it looks so much cooler. But now I have to fix this. And so on and so forth. Plus, I also kind of started it on an exploration mission demo to prove its capability.
See, I'm not the only one thinking along these lines,
Normal.
apparently.
Well, considering I'd been saying this for, like, I don't know, since before I even suggested the idea for Purity, it's kind of one of those things.
We have ourselves a true advocate of Foundry exploration here.
That's what Rogue brought up. He was like, we've been, like, I think he even said, Cass brought this up 6 months ago. It's like,
Well, it's just it's a matter of we know we can do some of this stuff better than the procedurally generated things. Let's prove it. Let's get out there. This just makes it so much easier because we can actually put the door there on Delta Volantis as opposed to having to stick it on Wolf 359 and just
we can put it where they'll see
we
it.
can do it right. It's one step easier.
Yeah.
Well, and that's what I've been thinking, and I posted this on the forums. I mean, I saw one particular user, I think he was arguing with Kirkfat, actually, up in the news post. He said something along the lines of, most Foundry missions aren't up to par with the exploration missions, which I think is complete crap. And I very much want to prove that person wrong.
Yes.
It's a give or take. For every Alimac mission that you have a Bobo mission or the pole dancing mission on Andoria.
I still very rarely encountered a mission that was actually worse than some of those exploration missions.
Who was it? Was
it's not unheard of.
Psychotic Vulcan in the Foundry forum was saying that the tagging system might actually be bearing fruit finally?
It was
at least on
Captain
the
Hunter.
Fed side. I've been keeping an eye on that because when they first brought out the tagging system, I mentioned that it would take time and we would have to see later.
Logically,
And at least on the Fed side, except for a couple that are arguably potentially like test your build missions, things like Battleship Royal Rumble and things like that, you're not seeing the grinders on the top 50 that you used to. And legitimate story missions are rising through the numbers and being on the top now.
Well, given that KDF missions are in general get less plays, wouldn't it take that much longer for things to filter out like it is on the Fed side?
I don't know. All I know is that, that on the Fed side or on the KDF side, it is not shaking out like it is on the Fed side.
But I mean,
KDF has something like 2/5 or 1/5, somewhere around there, the number of people playing actual Foundry missions.
so it may just take them longer to get the numbers necessary for the system to shake out.
Yeah,
I think there's still some issues though, because I mean, if you search by tags, I don't know if the exclude field actually works because I set it. I'm on the Fed side. Set it to exclude combat missions with combat tags, and the third one down is Admiral Bobo goes to war.
I don't think the search function is working with the tags properly.
Yeah, I have no. The problem is I don't
But,
know
like,
exactly how it's supposed to work.
That's part of the issue.
question.
But for me, it's like 4 months ago, if you looked at the top 10 missions, and that's what I've been doing to keep track of it. 4 months ago, the top 10 missions were something like 5 and 5. There were 5 story missions up there and 5 crappy farming missions. Now, there are 7 story missions and 3 farming missions, and as I said, one of those is arguably like a build test mission, depending on how you look at it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's kind
I
of
was going to say
partially that way.
Battleship Royal Rumble kind of gets somewhat of a pass on that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I should also point out that a number of those missions lost their reward status.
Yeah, and once
mysteriously.
they lose the reward status, a bunch of people stop playing them, stop voting on them. But yeah, so it's slowly changing, which is what I expected to see.
Well, I remember this one mission that the Galaxy SRS people published that, okay, this mission had a story. It wasn't a particularly compelling or good story, but, there's a, in-game reason why you're taking your ship to blow up entire enemy fleets single-handedly.
Okay.
But, that's what you were doing, is that you were literally taking your ship and going to blow up massive numbers of enemies single-handedly. And honestly, I think the person that designed this mission designed it specifically so that Spike escorts would be running into the fight of their lives. Because he liked to use the Mirror Universe battleships, which used TBR, but he would always set it so that you would be fighting several of them at once.
Okay.
Which, and of course he was careful to position them so that you couldn't do that thing where you line up 2 or 3 enemy ships, hit scatter volley along with a ridiculous number of buffs, and explode the entire enemy fleet simultaneously. But anyways, enough about that.
Well, I think the tagging system is something to keep an eye on, because as you said, Hippie, I mean, it was going to take time because he had all these existing missions that had no tags.
Right.
And I doubt very many people were going to go back and tag them. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think it's still maybe not.
It's not perfect, certainly.
Yeah.
And I don't think that the search function associated with the tagging system is working the way that it should be. That certainly is my feel.
I think the exclude is not, because I excluded space and it gave me Battleship Royal Rumble, which has 508 space tags. So I don't think that's working. And I very much have a feeling that not very many people are, and I don't have anything concrete to back this up, but I think not many people are actually using that to search.
Probably not.
That's
I think
just my guess.
We've all said it before that we'd very much love to see a full revamp of the Foundry search UI.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's one of those things kind of keep plugging at it. I mean, for me, it's kind of the number one Foundry issue right now.
The number one request for a UI revamp is the ability to, have pages of results instead of just giving you a list of 10 results.
Mm-hmm.
The next button.
Yeah.
But I mean, personally, I would love to see a big, complete revamp. I mean, of not only the Foundry UI, but the Mission Journal in general. There are so many aspects of the Mission Journal that are like these legacy leftovers from previous iterations.
Oh, yeah.
Just be nice to have the whole thing cleaned up and really given a thorough user experience pass.
Yep.
We need Thomas, the cat.
Yeah, he's been talking about Foundry lately. I mean,
been talking about Foundry.
Maybe talking about the right Foundry thing.
Maybe we'll point him in the direction of Captain Hunter's thread about
such a good idea.
UI.
That is just such a good idea.
Mm-hmm. He put into visuals the thing that I had been sort of wanting for years. So I'll see if I can tweet that to him. Why don't we move on to a discussion topic, since we actually already were kind of doing that. Hippie, why don't you start with yours?
I kind of mentioned it before, where I said I'm glad that these days I don't reply with my first, or I try not to let my first reaction to something be, the end all, certainly, of the way that I'm going to feel about that something, because I was really very unimpressed with the way that they communicated. We're going to be making these great new Foundry doors for you. Aren't you happy? I already was happy, and then when they said it the way that it was said, I became unhappy, because I was like, it was the way that it was presented. It made it sound like they were passing the buck. And that's one thing that I think still resonates with me as important, is that it is important in my mind to realize that, yeah, the Foundry and the community surrounding the Foundry is really wonderful. There are grand and brilliant creations that people make on a daily basis. That is no substitute for them to stop thinking about it or to stop thinking about exploration as that's what I'm getting at. It's the Foundry, as much as I love it, we're no substitute for them to not be thinking about exploration. And my personal hope is, just based on the way that communication has been over this past week, I have the feeling that we're going to see something of an exploration revamp in its own way. Possibly not exactly what everyone expects, but we're
Well, it's never what everyone expects.
Right.
I was going to say, I don't even know what to think of that yet.
I just think that they've got to have something in mind, because they can't. Like, it's just in my mind. They can't possibly really think that they can do away with exploration in a Star Trek game, is what it comes down to for me. They can't possibly think that, so that's my topic, is that they could have communicated it a lot better.
That's something that's been brought up a lot on the forums, and one conclusion that I've come to is that in an MMO format where, everyone goes where everyone has already been, I mean, going places where you've never been to before on a daily basis is only workable when you have something like the Genesis engine, and in those cases, it's kind of lame.
Very, very, very limited. But I mean, Hippie, that sort of feeling and attitude that the Foundry is the players doing Cryptic's job for them is not a new thing. It's been around since, it's been a criticism of the Foundry since the beginning.
It's just, it was the way it was communicated, strictly. And that's why I said I'm glad I didn't respond to my feeling on that.
Yeah, I mean...
And it may not have been the way they meant it.
No, I don't think it was. With further communication after that, they at least clarified to me that wasn't what they meant, and, so...
Yeah, I mean, it made that... there was that leap because it was we're removing the exploration clusters and we're adding Foundry doors, so it was pretty easy for people to make that jump. Now, they did it because... It was
actually the paragraph that was along with that, where he was like, and the Foundry meets all of what we have always hoped that that exploration could represent. There was something that he said along those lines.
To me, the best exploration-focused missions in Star Trek Online have been the featured episode missions. I mean, stuff like the one where you actually go to part of the Gamma Quadrant in the 2800 missions, and the ones in the Solanae and Janolan spheres.
Yeah, I mean, it does kind of have a strange new world feel to it.
There's some spirit of exploration that's in the game. It's not absent from the game, even with the removal of these clusters.
No, that's why that paragraph struck me as kind of like, wow, this is hard to read. I don't know.
I don't think you were the only one who walked away with that impression. And it's kind of had an unusual side effect I've noticed over the week that's since then. And I've noticed that suddenly there is a lot more attention on the Foundry in the general community than there was before. Because, I mean, the Foundry is kind of suffering from a bit of a reach problem. That, I mean, there are a lot of people that don't like the idea of user-generated content as kind of it's fanfic sort of a deal. But at the same time, I think there's a massive amount of people who have no idea what it is, no idea that it's there. The Foundry is not well introduced. There's no tutorial that introduces you to it. There's no easing you in or anything like that. So I think this has kind of brought the Foundry into the limelight, so to speak, at least for the moment.
A little bit, yeah.
I've almost kind of, I've been hearing a lot of rumblings, not only from the community but also from the devs. Because I mean, we've talked about Smirk's weird illusions, like in the last couple.
Foundry scheme of some sort.
Scheme.
And what was he talking about?
And just
we may never know.
And this is far from any sort of proof, or even at best it's a hunch. But I'm kind of noticing, even in the general community, just a lot of talking about the Foundry as, what would actually need to happen in order for the Foundry to effectively kind of fill that void. For one, I think the Foundry, the way we discover Foundry missions right now is somewhat insufficient to filling that task.
I agree.
But, let's kind of talk about it, though. Could the Foundry ever fill that task if given...
I actually think it's a good fit for it. I kind of agree with them, is that, we can create the variety of missions that Cryptic couldn't do. And, we're all Star Trek fans. We all have, the ideas of what an exploration thing might look like, and very different ones. And we can create that variety. But, you're right. And I think it needs I think it needs, for one, it needs buttons at each of those exploration doors that take you to the Foundry missions that start there.
Yeah. Because, I could see...
That's like a minimum. That just
for
seems
starters.
That just seems to be a no-brainer, because it has worked so well for them in Neverwinter.
Because it would basically make the exploration doors Harpers, or well-informed barmaids, or whatever.
Exactly. That has worked so well.
So the one I remember from Neverwinter is basically you walk up, there's this thing looks like a bulletin board. You walk up to the bulletin board and interact with it, and it gives you a mission.
Well, that's what they use for kind of the general Foundry search, like we have. But they've also got these well-informed barmaids, or these Harpers, that you talk to, and they basically give you 3 random missions from the area, wherever this person happens to be. And it kind of acts as a mission giver for Foundry missions.
Because one thing that has been mentioned by a lot of people on the forums, well, in many cases indirectly, but it's something that would help the Foundry a lot, it would seem, is just something that's like a random button. It's like, give me something.
Yeah. I don't know, if I always kind of wondered if your selection of missions is random, whether you could use it as kind of a means to offer more rewards without the risk of everyone just keep doing the same mission over and over again.
Right.
That's a good point.
So, I definitely think that there is potential there, and given the right development, maybe if the Foundry could offer something along the lines of a better version of what Genesis
which is actually
provided.
something that we had heard from Dan Stahl before previously.
Yeah, Dan had the idea of the big Foundry sector block.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think. I'm kind of wondering if there isn't some subtle winds of change on the horizon or something along those lines. I know it may just kind of be me being overly optimistic, but another thing that
It
And
could
there's
be
also,
wi-
I mean, some
it could be wishful thinking, but I'd rather be optimistic than pessimistic, honestly.
Yeah,
Sure.
it's definitely a better place to live in.
Also, this is one of those things where you never know whether they're going to actually tell us when they changed something.
Mhm.
Whether it's for the better or for the worse, we never know where they're going to tell us. I mean, like, you remember that whole thing where, the bioneural torpedoes incident.
What?
Are you kind of breaking
I
up there, Mark?
lost you.
yeah,
you were
you sort
breaking
of
up. I lost you.
something about bioneural torpedoes.
Hmm.
I said, you remember well, I mean, because they never mentioned anything about that being added to Foundry, because apparently the people who were adding that didn't realize it would get propagated to the Foundry.
Well, that happens. Yeah,
But I
that's
think what we're
happened a
talking
couple
about
of
here
times.
is some intentional changes
Well,
Yeah.
and some intentional development. And I think we're getting to a point where we're seeing more. It's not comprehensive yet, but we're seeing more things that are added to the Foundry popping up in the actual patch notes.
Another thing is,
Which is great.
The point I was making was simply that we don't really know whether they're going to actually remember to tell us every time they do something.
Sure.
well, I just want to point out.
True, but they're getting better about it. I mean, that's one thing that we're pointing out here. I guess.
They're
I
getting
just want
better.
I want to point out we just saw a Foundry update for a bunch of ships, and normally I wouldn't draw too much attention to it other than new stuff, except that this was completely unprompted from our end. Nobody went up to them and asked, "Hey, can we get these ships?" Nobody said, "Hey, we need more ships." They actually took their own initiative and added
Yeah, and
these things.
I had not seen a lot of requests for those ships lately. I mean, I think I've seen some bug reports in the past because, of course, like the Vesta ones were bugged, and now they're in there properly. But I hadn't seen a lot of requests for those ships specifically lately.
Well, my take on that particular thing is that the devs have seen the enormous list of things that people would like to have added to the Foundry, and have decided to approach it from the perspective of, okay, so what can we give them easily? And I guess that was part of it.
Could be. I mean, we've actually often gotten ship updates. I don't know, unofficially or accidentally.
I guess that's why my response to like the things that happened this week, I'm like, wow, this is one of the greatest weeks ever, because literally I can't think. I just know there have been a bunch in the last 6 months alone, in the last year,
The
if
last
you go that
2
far.
months.
Yeah, of new ships that were added to the Foundry that were never announced to us, that suddenly we had the ships and they were there. So the fact that these were announced made me go, cool, they're thinking about the fact that we would love to know these things.
Yeah,
So-
I don't know. Like I said, I mean, it's nothing definitive, but it just seems like a series of unusual occurrences that may or may not be suggestive.
Yeah, I don't disagree, but I don't know what it's suggestive of.
I don't
and there's
either, but-
always there's always the danger of reading too much into things,
Oh yeah.
which is something of a pastime for MMO players, especially those
Yeah.
who post on forums.
So what is happening now is what I've been asking for well over a year now, which is simply small updates of whatever they can get in. I don't even care if it's stuff we're asking for. Surprise, here's some ships we could get in over the course of a couple of afternoons. Hey, thanks. Like whatever that is, like my all I want is small updates of whatever they can get in whenever they can do it, and them telling us when they do that. I don't need a whole bunch of new systems. I've figured out how to work the Foundry the way that it works now. It comes down to that. Like, just tell me when you change things and when you give me new stuff to play with, and every so often throw a new toy. That's what I've been hoping for over a year.
Excellent. Let's see. Greendragoon, what was your topic? If we haven't already covered it.
No, I haven't. So, something that kind of came up today or this week on the forums was a thread asking about the whether or not we were allowed to use the Kinzinthi, which are Kinzinthi, which are basically the cat race upon which the Pharasans are sort of, kind of, but not really based on. And the reason that we have Pharasans and not Kinzinthi is that the Kinzinthi are copyrighted, and Stowe is not actually allowed to use them. They're actually, like, the copyright is controlled by a specific individual, and we don't have the rights.
Larry Niven, right?
I'm not sure exactly.
I think it's Larry
Niven.
So basically, this has kind of brought up the overall arching subject of copyright and the EULA and what we are and are not allowed to do. So I thought it would be kind of a good opportunity to kind of brush up on it and kind of do a refresher on the subject.
Seems like a good timing for it.
Yeah. I know, Cast, you had kind of, in this discussion, brought up a tale from an earlier time.
Yes, it was a bright and hopeful time. It was a time of many dreams and ideas. It was like a couple years ago.
It was back before the forum change.
It was back, I think, 2 forum changes ago, to be honest. Because there was the big change where everything became archived, and then there was a change before that. But so I guess we can call it the third age of forum kind.
I'm pretty sure we're like on the 5th or 6th.
Possibly. I stopped counting a while back. But basically... Oh, go ahead.
After they did the forum change and made everything archived, then they did the forum skin redesign.
Okay, so I guess then, yeah, we're in the 4th age.
So anyway...
Doesn't that mean we should like get rid of all the elves or something?
I think they're supposed to leave on their own.
Hey, wrong IP.
Oh, right. Okay, fine. The Vulcans. Or the Romulans. One of those pointy-eared folk.
Anyway.
Actually, it was just the light elves that left, so that was...
Anyway, back to your story.
So yeah, back in the heady days of 2011, there was much more heated debates over the nature of the EULA because we had no guidelines. We were just given this document that is possibly one of the most vaguely worded legalish documents you can imagine, and we start questioning it and debating it. Well, one guy, and unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on which way you look at it, whose name has now been redacted by archiving, had created a mission featuring Mackenzie Calhoun, who you can find on K7 being hideously underused as one of the PvP guys. Well, he's from the novel series New Frontier by Peter David. He features majorly in there. Well, he created this mission using him and other featured characters from inside of it. And we were all kind of debating back and forth of how this fell within the realm of the EULA, because it specifically states you can't use an actor's likeness, but it doesn't so much say anything about what you can do with a character who appears outside of the TV series. So the consensus we came up with is that Cryptic had permission to use Mackenzie Calhoun because they were using him for a very specific purpose, and that we don't have the fair use of him under their license. Well, through contacts this guy had, he went and got in touch with Peter David's wife, who he asked Peter to grant permission for him to do this. Now, I don't have all of the details because they're lost to history and multiple retellings, but Peter did not react greatly to this request, and there were communications back and forth. Demonic lawyers may have been invoked. The long and short of it is that the then customer service manager, which I really do think it was Stormshade and not Wishstone.
Yeah, it was Stormshade.
Right there,
I checked.
that right there, that pretty much dates it. If anybody remembers these names, came into the forums and very politely said, "Please don't use any of these characters because we don't really have the license to grant you. And please, while your enthusiasm is greatly appreciated, do not take the initiative to contact these people directly, as it impinges upon their time and energies," which was the very polite way of saying, please don't ever do that again.
Well, another thing that came out of this that a user by the name of Valiant, I think it was, pointed out in the fallout of that incident is that people eventually found out that Peter David didn't actually have the legal authority to grant people the ability to use the character anyways, simply because of the fact that it was his publisher that owned the rights and not him personally.
Yeah, pocketbooks.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think this kind of goes to show the massive, complicated nature of copyright, and how even something seemingly harmless can mushroom out into a horrible, horrible mess.
Well, the EULA is fairly specific in these things. I mean, the things that you're allowed to use must come from the shows themselves, and it specifically, I think, excludes the animated series from that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You can't bring in anything from the novels. You can't bring anything from, I don't know, any of the web content or anything like that. It just has to come from the shows and the movies, excluding, of course, the new movies because they're under Paramount and not CBS. And you can't bring anything in that's copyrighted, by a third party. And, essentially you just have to stick to Star Trek and the Star Trek shows.
Yeah.
But you can't, of course, use anybody's likeness, any actor's likeness without... And obviously, the other thing, of course, is that we can't go and negotiate with somebody to use their likeness. We're not empowered to do that. Cryptic can, but there's no way that we can, because we operate under their license.
Yeah, and really, I mean, in some respect, Cryptic is responsible for what we do in the Foundry. So, but I mean, odds are we're not the ones that get sued. It'll be Cryptic that gets sued.
Yeah.
Well,
and I have a feeling if they get sued enough, the Foundry will just shut down.
Yeah.
If
you consider the fact that very plainly stated in the terms of service that you agree to when you start with the Foundry, anything that you create is the property of Cryptic. So therefore, anything you create that violates those terms of service are violating them for Cryptic, and therefore they become the ultimate responsibility for your blowing up Cardassia or putting 5 TV series actors in as close of an approximation as you can into existence.
Or something that's like really out there, like having the say Haydenites invade Earth space dock.
So I don't know that blowing up Cardassia would actually be a EULA violation.
No. Where it really comes into play is essentially violating the law, which is the likeness thing and bringing in copyrighted material, things like that. I mean, those are actual violations of the law, or at least U.S. law anyway. Can't speak for China, but violations of U.S. law.
Well, to be fair, China does not have the legal right to have Star Trek Online anyways, so... But the EU, on the other hand, which has much weirder and arcane laws, they get more interesting.
Also, one thing that I've learned over the years is that U.S. law has special provisions regarding whether or not you make money off of your use of copyrighted material. However, in the case of Star Trek Online, since, like you said, it falls back on the cryptic thing, the game itself is a money-making enterprise, so by extension, us doing something with a copyrighted thing, like, say, adding Robotech characters to Star Trek, would, constitute something that would be considered money-making, just not for us.
It's the same reason YouTube has to release its content.
Yeah, you're right about that, and I've heard people use that exact defense when they were trying to get around the EULA. Is that, I'm not making any money on this. Of course, I can do this. Not so much.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and if you really want to start getting nitty-gritty, it could be argued that we are technically making money if we receive tips, because tips can be converted into Zen, and Zen
Which
can
is
is a dollar.
Yeah, but
purchasable.
those can never be converted back into dollars. So we can't technically make money off of it.
Easily directly, but it could probably be argued by somebody.
Either war, in either of those scenarios, Cryptic would still get sued, and it would still suck for all of us.
Yeah, that's.
So, one thing.
So
I'm
the long
kinda,
and short of it is that we don't tick off Harmony Gold because they will come after you.
So
This
something
is true.
that I've seen a lot of people try to get around this with is like making the characters, attempting to make the characters look less or not at all like they're the actors that portrayed them. And I'm personally of the opinion this gets a little murky, because then you get into the question of how close is what you're recreating to what the actor actually looked like. I mean, in some cases it's they look nothing alike, or they'll do like really creative things like put them in shadow so you couldn't tell what they look like anyways. Or
personally, I
like
just
that.
wouldn't bother.
Yeah, but yeah, it's one of those things you got to be really careful with, and all good.
And Sir Boulevard is bringing up another point. He says, how does the EULA affect a character who was a child on the show and under heavy makeup, who would now be in their 50s and still under heavy makeup?
As
Well, I
long
think
as
that
you're
probably goes back to the frequently asked questions thread that maybe nobody looks at anymore. But number 6 says, I know we cannot portray actors, but what about characters who are in costumes and makeup and you cannot tell who the actor was? And the answer is nothing in the EULA prevents this.
Yep, every time.
You haven't noticed is that that's like their answer for everything.
It was exactly their answer for everything.
Brandon
Yeah.
pretty much, I think, copy-pasted into the frequently asked
Yeah.
that same statement.
There is
Yeah.
nothing in the EULA
It
preventing.
was essentially just a list of things that the EULA does not prevent us from doing.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
because one example is the characters that you see in Star Trek Online that, they were in the TV show, but they weren't in the TV show as adults, at least not normally.
Yeah, we got a few of those.
Kiyoshi,
Naomi Wildman.
Naomi
I
Wildman.
mean, there was an adult version of Naomi Wildman, but the version in the game is not really recognizable as looking like Vanessa Branch.
Muriel Paris is another one that did both.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the Muriel Paris we have doesn't look much anything
Yeah.
like.
Like the one from the
The
end
actor.
game.
So yeah, I mean,
I don't know. You get into a few gray areas, that's for sure.
I don't know. I'm not so sure about the Picard with a visor thing.
Yeah.
I'm not terribly sure about that one either, even though I just posted gray area-ish. I think that one, if he's bald and if he, you're definitely getting into
Yeah, it gets to the point where you're still, by visual recognition, suggesting it's Picard.
Patrick Stewart.
Yeah.
aka Patrick Stewart. So
Yeah.
Well, and I've always had a major debate on this personally, because I've always looked at it from the standpoint of this is our galaxy. It is not a small place. Why must we focus on these 5 individuals and their ancillary crewmen as being the focus of everything? Why is it not that there is other captains? I mean, we've heard of Garth of Izar. We've heard of all these other captains who did these great things that we never saw on screen. Why not focus on that?
I think there's this impulse amongst, we're all fans of the shows. We get this opportunity to make missions in a Star Trek environment. Well, of course there's that urge to use the canon characters.
Yeah, and I think I think that's a wider discussion about fandom in general. And
Yeah.
How many fanfic authors out there do not create their own characters? Probably a lot.
Well, I mean, because I actually used to do fanfic writing before, a long time ago, and I would actually kind of like mix original characters with the ones in the show because it's boring if all you're doing is writing the characters that have been seen already, because it's one of those been there, done that sort of thing.
It used to be at cons, with the first cons I went to back when I was but a wee lad, you could get the writers' Bibles from the show at the con. You could get like the Next Generation Season 4 Writer's Bible. That's how people who submitted scripts would know what to write. They were like, that was it. So,
well, and it could almost be argued that may be one of the major reasons why there is the resistance to the Foundry as being a thing, like a replacement for the exploration clusters, because of the perception that it is a harbor of fanfic fanatics, as opposed to being a legitimate tool to legitimately explore a broader universe than just these 500 episodes, 45 characters.
My memory alpha foo is failing me right now.
7 ships.
Well, see, because
Right.
that's one of the things that I personally, as someone who at least used to write fanfics, has pondered over the years is, does being a fanfic make something a bad story? No.
Not necessarily.
No, definitely
not. Not necessarily. And being a professional piece of writing doesn't make something necessarily a good story.
I mean, because that's one of the things that has always bugged me about that whole thing with people calling something bad fanfics is because, well, let's face it, if you're not being paid to write about a subject, it's a fanfic.
Right.
Anyone who's not paid to do it.
Well, and to be perfectly honest, I believe I'm remembering the story correctly, and I'm sure I will be corrected if not. But some of the Star Trek authors, such as Dayton Ward, started out as writing what essentially was fanfic and submitted it to Strange New Worlds, which got it approved, which then got him a contract to write regular stories, which then got us the wonderful Star Trek Vanguard novels, which, by the way, don't focus on those 5 captains pretty much.
Well, see, I've actually heard stories about, other fictional universes and how, people that were, fans of those fictional universes came up with their own ideas, shared them with the people who, actually had the copyrights for those. And, the people with the copyright society liked them enough to actually use them in a published work. Granted, these are exceptions rather than the rules, but it's
that's how a lot of the TV writers got started, essentially writing spec scripts and submitting them.
So,
this
I mean,
is true.
Something I always kind of like to suggest to authors, especially those who really want to base their work off of characters from the show is to look at the characters and the aspects of those characters that really speak to you. I mean, all art is derivative. It's all based on things that we've seen before, and we build upon it and mold it and make it our own. And that's really what, Foundry authors ought to do is, you like Captain Picard, that's great. What about Captain Picard do you really like? Can you take those qualities and those aspects and incorporate it into your own characters? Can use that to build up and strengthen your own writing and to make it something truly unique and original to yourself.
Yeah,
that's great advice.
Silax Shran has many similarities to Captain of Sean in Star Trek Online, but it's not obviously the same character.
But then you're also free to go through and tweak the characters and make them different. Because for instance, what would Picard have been like if he had been devastated by his experience with the Borg and had just dropped out of Starfleet? What kind of character would he have been then? Maybe you're dealing with a Starfleet captain who's been assimilated and liberated from the collective, and it's shaken him to his core. How does that change things? Take ownership of your characters.
Well, for example, you have someone who is in a similar situation to Picard, who instead of being, horribly, violently opposed to the concept of the Borg, decided that they wanted to use what was left of their Borg cybernetics kind of like a toy.
I know I've got a Vulcan ensign in my mission named Tlock, and Tlock is based off of Tuvok from Voyager, and specifically the episode Flashback, where it goes back to the Excelsior, where he's an ensign. And I kind of watched how Tim Russ played Tuvok differently for that younger self, and I know one of the things I noticed, he was very eager to please and trying to impress the captain. And he's trying to be very logical about it. It's like, oh, I'm just trying to be efficient and all that. But it kind of came off as brown-nosing to his crewmates. And so I kind of explored with that and made an over-eager Vulcan who was really going out of his way to impress the captain unknowingly. With very elaborate explanations and trying to explain every little detail, and I intentionally wrote massive amounts of technobabble into all of his dialogue, far more than was necessary. And in 9 times out of 10, your captain ends up having to cut him off just because he would keep going on if you didn't stop him. So something like that. It's clearly I was inspired by a canon character, and specifically a specific aspect of a canon character. But then I turned it around and kind of started to build on it myself.
Now here's the flip side of that is, what about characters that Star Trek Online has created? Like Admiral Quinn or...
Forrest.
Yeah, all those guys, all the admirals, all the Dr. What's his name, Dr. Cooper. What about those guys? And we have actually a little bit of conflicting information on those, because in that story that Cass told earlier, I think part of that was they were told that we would rather you not use those characters. But after that, when the Foundry frequently asked, or the EULA frequently asked questions came out, that was on the list of we're not prohibited from doing that.
Yep.
So yeah, I would consider the EULA frequently asked question thing to be supersede what Stormshade said, because Stormshade was the community manager at the time, and he is not a lawyer. He's kind of relaying stuff. Whereas, as far as we have been told, the EULA questions were actually answered by a lawyer.
Yeah, 'cause as far as I know, Stormshade's answers were, I guess you could say, preliminary.
Yeah,
They weren't the final word on the subject.
And he's
So
definitely playing it safe.
Yeah, playing it safe, and my thinking is, obviously they would rather we not use those characters. Because even though they may not be using them right now, these are characters that they have put into their toolbox for storytelling. So.
Yes, because there's always the possibility that use of a Stowe character will conflict with something that character does in a story that Cryptic writes after the story that you saw last time and got your idea from.
Mm-hmm.
So, in those situations, I kind of give the advice, yes, you can use them, but be careful with them.
Yeah.
You don't want to accidentally go too far with a character and write something that can be overwritten later. It's just annoying for you as a writer, and it's annoying for people who may play your mission down the road. That said, I would never say it as a hard and fast rule of don't use Quinn or any of those, because clearly, there are situations you can have Quinn in where it's not going to have any major impact on his character overall or anything that Cryptic might do.
In one of my missions, I used Quinn for no reason other than talking to him for getting your mission and talking to him when you're finished with the mission, reporting back on what happened. That was it. You're just reporting to him as a mission contact, even though I had to make a custom costume to do that.
So I have a question for you guys. Maybe some of you guys who know the books more than me.
Okay.
Is President Okeg an invention of Cryptic, or does he come from somewhere else?
Okeg is entirely a Cryptic origin one. Now, Bacco does come from within the novel sphere.
Is his predecessor.
His predecessor.
Yeah.
But Okeg is entirely, and his administration has been entirely on Cryptic.
Okay, good. So I was going to say, we got some major spotlight missions that use Okeg.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and Okeg has been almost never touched by Cryptic. we only know him because of the Path to 2409.
Yeah.
So we don't even have an idea of what he looks like.
He's not in game anywhere. We just made up a Saurian for him.
Right.
Because that's about the only thing we knew about him.
So, I think Pax was asking earlier about Sela. And, so...
Yeah, I think Sir Boulevard had gotten some communication on that they would rather we not use her as Sela. That one, the lookalike that we have.
Yeah.
Because remember the last time we were talking about that.
It's just such a... They gave us the lookalike long before... Maybe not that long before, but it was before Denise Crosby was in the game. And so I think that might be a case of they put it in there and they've just never taken it out after they got Denise Crosby in the game.
Well, they updated it when they did the LOR stuff, so I don't think it's
right. Because when they
had Sela
model,
because we had Sela in the
it
game.
updated in the Foundry as well.
Yeah.
I don't know, because it's very, from the description, it's very clearly whoever put it in there knew they were putting in Sela.
Yeah, because it was the old Sela that didn't look like Denise Crosby. And then when they updated the Sela in the game to look more like Denise Crosby, the one in the Foundry that they had put in as a joke updated as well.
I'm not sure if that was an accident or intentional. It may have been.
Yeah, that's a whole, we have no idea.
That's true, but, yeah.
But, needless to say, I know, Pax, that you have Sela in your missions. It probably isn't hurting that you're downplaying her presence. In general, I would say, because she is such a high-profile character, it probably doesn't hurt to use her like a pinch of Sela instead of a large amount. And in general, she's this incredibly, even in game or in fiction, such a high profile character that you almost want to say the odds of situation in which you would meet her would have to be very limited. Because, I mean, she sees you on a couple of occasions, like in the cryptic missions. So you kind of run the risk of her recognizing you from a hypothetical continuity scenario. So,
especially if you're playing a Romulan Republic character, because one of the Romulan Republic missions, you meet Sela in person.
Yeah.
No, several.
Actually, twice. Once in a transport room where you're pretending to be a Tal Shiar agent, and once at the Khitomer conference. Although your background
on board the Keneal was one of them, yeah.
Although I think in the Khitomer conference you're kind of a background character. You
That
don't really
too,
draw our
actually,
attention.
yes, that's great.
So Pax says that he also is presuming that the Sela costume will be taken out at some point, and that's the real reason he's writing the character out, which is a reasonable expectation because they may just decide they don't want to deal with that issue and get rid of it.
Yeah, but I mean, really, there's no way.
But
that,
I don't think they're necessarily paying that much attention to it.
Yeah, and it may be one of those things that they're not going to give it a lot of attention unless it becomes an issue.
Yeah.
Unless they get a lot of reports about missions using that. Which, I can't say how much EULA reporting is actually going on, how many people are actually using that report button.
But it has
I
raised
haven't
issues
had
in the
to
past.
in a long time.
It's only come up a few times for me where there was something that was so egregious.
Yeah, I mean, there are probably cases where a clear violation has occurred.
Mm-hmm. And there were a couple times where I seen something that was probably a violation, and I just went and talked to the author about it rather than report the mission.
Yeah, and that's usually what, I mean, if I'm ever in doubt, usually what I'll do.
So there's another EULA issue that came up today. It was something that was posted on the forums. Let me go find that thread. While I'm looking for this thread, we actually got some patch notes for tomorrow's holodeck patch, and the only thing in them is, in fact, the Foundry being fixed. So, huzzah! Let's hope that
I'm
is
not surprised
actually
at this
fixed.
point. I don't think we're going to see anything big until the 9.5 patch.
No, of course not.
Yeah.
Hear me, baby, hold together.
So,
and we, of course, thank you, Cryptic, for the swift return of the Foundry.
Sure. So this user posted down in the Foundry forums. He said, "The rages and rampages about all these changes in game have got me thinking. If I were to try and make a mission or a set of missions parodying everything going on, how could I do it without making it anti-cryptic /PWE or taking blatant potshots at people?" It brought to my mind two things, and the first was your parody grinder mission, Hippie, which Brand Flakes kind of jumped on. I don't think it was necessarily a EULA violation.
Oh, it wasn't. I didn't do anything that broke the EULA.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it wasn't. To get a comment about it from the community manager was
it was literally. Come on, man, I know you can be a better person than this. And I was like, all right, fine.
And the other one was that one particular user who got very disgruntled with the Purity project and the Purity group and attempted to make some sort of what he called a parody, but I think, according to the guys who actually played it, it was essentially just a rant disguised as a Foundry mission.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
which that one got actually pulled, I think. I don't know if he pulled it or if Cryptic pulled it, but it definitely got pulled. But, I think, to my mind, the part of the EULA that this falls under is that there's a section there that says you may not use new game materials to convey any profanity, vulgar, or hate language, and that's the part I focused on. Because I think that was necessarily, what it actually refers to is more like, hate language towards, race, gender, religion, that sort of thing.
Right.
But I really don't...
groups of people in general.
Yeah. But I really don't think that Cryptic is going to stand for hate language directed at them in their own game.
Okay, if a forum thread on the subject can be shut down, then you can bet that the Foundry mission is probably going to be subject to the same kind of rules.
Mm-hmm.
That's just a probably. I don't know that for sure.
my response to reading that that post was I thought about it for a while, and my response would be, if you have to ask the question of how do I do this without being offensive, I question whether you should do it in the first place.
Yeah, it's probably not a good idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other thing was, it reminded me of, how do you do parodies well? Which is, how do you make them tongue-in-cheek and not necessarily... I don't even know if I'm explaining this properly.
Well, one thing that I've heard about parodies in general from a while back, and I'm not sure exactly how much of it applies to the Foundry, but the number one thing to do about parodies is to make fun of the source material without demeaning the source material.
Yeah.
So a good example would be like Galaxy Quest.
Yep.
Galaxy Quests, Spaceballs.
So yeah, they definitely make fun of the material, but at the same time, they're actually they very much are showing their love for the material.
Mm-hmm. I think
Right.
you can't make a good parody unless you actually like what you're parodying.
Yeah.
And in this case, I don't think this user is actually liking what he's parodying, so
Right.
probably not a good place to be coming from. But for me, it always reminded me of the reason I stopped watching South Park. Because in the first 4 or 5 seasons of South Park or something, they were just absolutely brilliant parodies of real world things, especially like the Chimpokomon episode was great. But then in the later episodes, it just felt like, okay, this thing that they're commenting on, it's like they're writing it on a nail and hammering it repeatedly into my head, and it's just, I didn't like that. So I mean, it's all in how you approach it.
Only, to me, good examples of good parodies would include the airplane movies and the loaded weapon movies. Those are things that stick out in my mind as good parodies.
For me, this kind of situation also is, why is the current, quote unquote, whatever rage or, anger about Cryptic this guy is referencing, why is this so much more important than the last one? And why is the Foundry the only way to express it? Those are the questions I would ask.
I would guess it's not, personally, but
It's not. It's not. I honestly think
It
this
just
someone
is.
who's...
It might be for this user.
Yeah.
Because everybody has their axe to grind, and everybody has that one change that they just absolutely hate and wish that they never did.
It's
and
clarify,
it's going to be different
for me.
And I've seen people hang on to those kind of grudges for years.
Mm-hmm.
The game's going to change. I've accepted that. I'm not going to love all of them. In fact, sometimes I'm going to hate them, but I'll either stick around or I won't,
So whenever the subject of parody comes up, I always like to point people to Zorbane's missions, and his, because he's got a parody of Iron Man called Duratanium Man, and now he's got another one of the Hulk called The Incredible Bulk. Am I getting that title right?
Yes.
He is actually very good about both parodying and tiptoeing very carefully far enough away from the original source to not be in violation of anything.
I'd like to point out that he did something very similar to what we're talking about in the Galaxy's Fair. He completely lampooned the Cryptic under when Dan Stahl was executive producer. He did it respectfully, it was funny, and it addressed some of the things that people said. But it was obvious that, hey, I love these guys.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, anyone kind of looking for parody done well in the Foundry, check out Zorbane's missions.
Excellent. Let's see. Mark, you and I were corresponding back and forth about a good topic. Villain motivations. Which I thought was a very good topic, because I think the best villains out there are ones that have their own motivations. But here's my take on the topic, and the question I want to ask everybody is, how much should you reveal of those motivations?
As much as is natural. I think a lot of people, when they try to reveal too much of the villain's motivations, it comes out as the ubiquitous monologue. So, I don't know. I guess my take on it is, and this kind of almost applies to anything storytelling, is to peel back your characters and layers. Even with your villains, it's a matter of digging a little deeper, a piece at a time. Not just dumping everything out at once. But that said, I mean, I definitely think having good, well-developed motivations for your villains, even if it's not something that you reveal, can be very good just in writing the villains.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't necessarily need to be complex. It can be something simple. It's just that it's one of those things where you don't necessarily put everything out on the surface. So, but I guess the best way to explain it is that when you're writing, you need to think about why the villain is doing what they're doing, because, well, I've often found that it helps me come up with story ideas when I look at, I set up the characters in the story, and then I look inside the head of the character to see what this particular character is thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Because, like, again, I'm going to use diplomacy in the Gamma Quadrant as an example. In the mission, you have Loris, who the Klingon High Council sends you to negotiate with the Dominion. Well, okay, you're actually not negotiating. You're escorting a negotiator to talk to a representative of the Dominion. When you get there, you find out that the representative of the Dominion is Loris, but Loris decides that she's not ready to go with you immediately and makes you go do a bunch of random, tedious tasks that you eventually find out were kind of utterly pointless, and your character comes to the conclusion that Loris is screwing with you for some reason. Then at the end of the mission, you find out why. I mean, because when you look at it from Loris's perspective, she had two things that she was planning on doing in the near future, and due to an unexpected turn of events, she has to come up with a way of doing both of them simultaneously. So she sends you on a bunch of tedious tasks while she reschedules things to work the way she wants them to. Then, after she's done with that, you continue on with the mission.
I think you hit on something there that's a very good piece of advice, is that it's often better to have the player slowly find out what the person's motivations are rather than to have them tell you outright.
That would be my answer to the question, would be how much to reveal is as much as is needed to help the player see the villain as a credible character. When you have a villain that's nothing but the mwahaha, you have to reveal something more about them if you want them to be taken seriously, if that's what you're aiming for. But I would say the way to do it is slowly, and through natural progression of the story, you find out why they might do things the way they do or whatever.
Well, one thing I found to be extremely amusing when people do it, but it's not something that I've seen people do a lot, it is to set up a mustache-twirling villain and have it so that the mustache-twirling thing was a front because the villain wanted to intimidate people or something or other like that.
But essentially what you don't want to get into is a place where, you're like in Austin Powers, speaking of parodies, where Dr. Evil tells you his whole entire plan, just assuming that you'll be killed, and then, of course, you put you in an easily escapable situation. Because that's not realistic.
Unless that level of parody is what you're aiming for.
Yeah, unless that's what you're aiming.
To be fair, that happened in several of the Bond movies, too.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there was a reason that parody existed.
And that was going to be sort of my point, is that you want your villain to be developed like Jack Nicholson in A Few Good Men, when you get build up to that last courtroom scene where he just starts screaming about how you want him up on that wall, you need him up on that wall, versus Jonathan Pierce in Tomorrow Never Dies and his whole media empire to take over the world through television thing.
You expect me to talk? No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die.
Yeah, I think
However,
you
will
just cited
it
a
too.
great villain, though, Cast. I mean, you're absolutely right. That build up to that scene, I mean, you don't really see how deep who he is and why he is the way he is until that very last courtroom scene. You see hints of it, but you don't get all of that.
And that's actually what made
the
him...
main character is slowly figuring it out.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what made him such a good... Because he was probably one of the most dangerous villains because, one, he does not see himself as a villain.
Mm-hmm.
Two, his motives are quote-unquote altruistic. And three, he's dedicated to his cause. That right there is what makes some of the most dangerous villains.
Kind of reminds
I
me
mean-
of Ducat when you phrase it that way.
Yeah, every villain.
Ducat
Another thing.
is also another one who, over time, got new layers, and you think he's a good guy, but then he does something to prove that he's really not that good of a guy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
And then he kills
beginning-
Jadzia.
at the very beginning. I mean, he and Cisco were almost allies.
Yeah, all those. Yeah,
And you see an episode
they
like
really
the
made
Maquis.
they really made the character resonate on some levels. I mean, he was a father, and that resonated with a lot of people. And the way that episode where he and Cisco talked about their children, all of that really contributed to him being a really full character that
But I
was more than just mustache twirling.
Yeah, for the longest time.
and then he went crazy.
But that was the great part is that, I mean, for the longest time he thought he was his own hero.
Right.
And really, I mean, as more and more as things didn't go his way and as what he thought he deserved didn't come to fruition, his whole personality just started to twist and bend until it was so completely distorted there was nothing good left in him.
You almost feel bad for him when he
Yeah,
goes crazy.
My take on Ducat was basically that he was kind of like a wolf in sheep's clothing, where he his goals were something that he kept to himself. He acted nice and friendly and congenial and whatever, as long as that got him what he wanted.
Well, yeah, but he had all this built-up pride and what's the right term?
And
there was also a lot of nationalism.
Not only nationalism, but
He was Captain
It was sort of,
Cardassian.
it was, yeah, it was sort of, but being Cardassian, he still had a lot of self-interest of I do what it takes to advance the state as well as long as it benefits myself too.
But I mean, in a lot of ways, he had a lot of "I deserve this" kind of an attitude. Like, I deserve this respect. People owe me this.
Well, that was
and he
also
did this
kind
a
of
lot with Cisco.
a national Cardassian trait.
But no,
too.
even more. I mean, he was almost obsessed at times with the fact that Cisco didn't respect him, and that just would eat him up inside because he felt like he deserved Cisco's respect.
Oh yeah. I always go back to there's a commentary with Joss Whedon on the pilot episode of Firefly, and I can't remember who he's quoting, but he says something about, he's talking to somebody about the difference between heroes and villains, and this person said to him, "Ain't no such thing. Everybody thinks they're righteous."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, and in fairness, I mean, the most relatable character or villains are the ones that, at some kernel of a level, is an element that we can see in ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
But usually in the villain, it's become so blown out and twisted that it's no longer even resembles good. But of course, the person actually going through this can never actually see it.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, another thing that I've pondered with villains is not so much, examining their motivations, but writing a story so that you get this glimpse inside their thought processes.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's this Facebook game called Marvel Avengers Alliance. Well, in one of the missions, you listen to a conversation between Daredevil and Bullseye, where Daredevil mentions the fact that Bullseye keeps calling him the blind guy instead of using his actual name. At which point Bullseye replies that he doesn't really care what his name is, because names are just labels, and they don't really have anything to do with who or what you are as a person.
That's kind of something that I've been doing in my latest mission with Major Recall, is that before you meet her, you encounter a series of her personal logs, and you get sort of an insight into who she is and where she's been and what her current sort of thought process is.
Well, and that was something I was going to say, is that as a Foundry author, you can do so much Easter egg sort of thing to explain these motivations that these people have without doing the massive mwahaha villain monologue. Just putting log entries in a console, or describing some sort of recorded material from a Starfleet interview or some other thing in the environment that lets you discover more about the characters in the environment without having to do the whole mustache twirling girl tied to a railroad track mwahaha.
Yeah.
The villain, I have to say, was actually a rather amusing movie, simply because of the fact that you never really find out what the villain's actual goal was in the entire movie anyways.
I've got a question related to what we're talking about.
That'll be this will have to
tables.
be our last thing for tonight.
Okay, to go around
Go
the
ahead.
table. Who is everyone's favorite villain? And how do you relate, how would you, or rather, hopefully start thinking about how would you relate that favorite villain? And it doesn't have to be from Star Trek, but how could you move that sort of a thing into a Foundry mission? And that's another one of those. I'd love to hear what everyone in the chat room and everyone who listens to the show, who is your favorite villain of all time? For me, that's a really tough question.
Maybe let's think about that one and come back to it next.
Yeah. That's a great community.
Because I'm going to have to think about that.
Yeah,
a little bit.
since I can't guarantee that I will be back next time, I might be. We don't know yet, but I will go ahead and say that it is the redacted villain from Purity, because he fits a lot of what we were just talking about with
He does.
being a true believer and.
Mhm.
And doing it for what he thinks is the greater good. The greater good.
The hero of his own story.
Exactly. And I think that Paul Dennis gave enough notes and background to make him the monstrous character that he is, or she, so that...
I have to admit, I wrote, at the very end, sort of that mustache twirling dialogue a little bit, the very last speech. But I don't know. It felt like that's what it needed to be.
Because
occasionally, sometimes that's what you need.
Because that was the sort of thing that makes them a dangerous adversary, that they want to be up on that wall defending you against the darkness.
Mm-hmm.
And they think that they're right. So that's my choice.
All right. Well, we will put that out there to the chat room and the community at large. Put your answers on our forum thread or on comments on Starbase UGC, and we will talk about this when we return next week. Mm-hmm. But for now, Dragoon.
Oh.
All
Real
right.
quick. Before you do, I do want to throw out there real quick. This weekend, which might actually be when this is actually being released, so I apologize for that. The Stonewall Fleet is having their Pride weekend, and they will be featuring. I don't know if anybody's been watching this on Twitter, but there's a mission called Adrift that has been being teased pretty much since the beginning of the year.
Awesome.
Apparently,
Yeah,
it
it's
is finally complete, and he is a member of the Stonewall Fleet, and they are featuring it as part of their playthrough weekend because they're doing a big in-game thing for their Pride weekend.
Awesome.
They're going to be focusing on that. Max Spirits of Ramaknor was one of their choices previously, and a couple of other missions, the Wounded Wolf and Operation Demon Storm. So if you guys see any of them in game, congratulate them on 5 years of continual focus on the Foundry and stuff, and play their missions and give them good feedback.
Awesome.
All right. So, if anyone wants to get a hold of us, they can contact us by email at foundryroundtable@live.com. We can also be reached on Twitter at Foundry Roundtab. Drogan can be reached at Drogan1701. Hippiejohn can be reached at Hippie_John. Markhawkman can be reached at MAR Hawkman. And I can be reached at Greendragoon.
And of course, I can get reached at the Starbase UGC Twitter.
Which he pretty much uses as his own personal account anyways.
Very rarely uses his
that-
actual personal account.
That is a spurless lie, just like the lies that have been told about me playing Foundry missions.
You said it yourself, though. Twice.
I was gonna say, we've got recorded evidence.
It's one of those things like what Captain Jack Sparrow would occasionally say, you know?
I never play Foundry missions, except when I do.
Well, that's it for us tonight, guys, so we'll say goodnight.
All right, good night, everyone.
Night.
Good night.
Night.